Hey, welcome to a Monday, Men of a Certain X, as I fly solo today while Dave enjoys a little vacation in the great state of Florida. Welcome back. Happy Monday, July 29th. Today we're going to jump into a bunch of things we go through, hopefully something close to our 3x7 format. As last time I was alone, I completely blew that. So let's just start with a couple things. First is Dave's down in the Sunshine State. He did share that they saw Deadpool and Wolverine. We'll get his thoughts on that a little bit later this week, and we'll circle back to that at today's episode's end because I'm going to touch on a couple entertainment things. But let's start off with the magnificent power of olive oil. You know, we love to talk about the Arnold Pump newsletter in these podcasts. It's a great resource, a free resource. You should tie into it, subscribe. I'll share a link for it later. But in not the most recent, last week's episode on Wednesday's newsletter, they talk about olive oil and new research suggesting that the Mediterranean diet might be healthy because of its emphasis on consuming more olive oil. So, hey, it's a great health benefit. That same newsletter also talks about some coffee alternatives and ideas there. You can check those out. I bring up olive oil. One, thanks Mom and Jabor for being an olive oil enthusiast. We grew up with a very Mediterranean diet growing up. And last night, by the way, I cooked some fantastic Lebanese burgers, doing a little bit of experimentation. I shared this on Threads. I typically do that with all beef. Yesterday, tried a lamb beef combo. Gotta say, it tasted great, was light and delicious, but a burger, it's gotta be all beef. So a good experiment. I think I'm sticking with all beef. But hey, that's neither here nor there. Just some information to start your day with. Again, check out the Arnold Pump Club newsletter, free resource, great resource, health tips, motivation, a lot of encouragement. We're big fans here, Dave and I both. But let's talk about three things today. We're going to go into three quick segments. The first one is starting on a conversation I had with my my youngest son, Saturday as we were working out in the gym. We were hitting the back and buys in our garage. We were sweating. And as we did, we always have good conversations. We started talking about the idea of what is a sport, right? We're watching the Olympics. We're seeing different events. We're like, some of these are sports. Some of these are like more like games than sports, and should they really be considered Olympic events or sports? Hey, I may offend a little bit this morning. I may talk about a sport that you hold close, near and dear to your heart. Love to hear your feedback, but let's just discuss it, right? So we're talking about what makes a sport. I've for a long time teased that baseball wasn't a sport, that it was a game, but it wasn't physically exerting enough to be a sport. Now, I don't mean that. Baseball is a legitimate sporting event, but some things we consider sports maybe aren't. And so, listen, just get one example out the door early. Bowlers, great game, a lot of fun. But listen, if you can guzzle a glizzy and a beer and then walk up and execute your sport with excellence, it's probably not as physically demanding as a sport needs to be a sport. It's a great game, like billiards and pool and chess, but it's not a sport, right? And so let's talk about that a little bit. So what's the definition of a sport? That's what my son and I started talking about was, let's go to the standard. What does it even mean to say something's a sport? By definition, a sport is an activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or team competes against another or others for entertainment. Okay, that's pretty good. Physical exertion and skill, competition, right? There's some basic criteria. Football, soccer, volleyball, like obviously sports, right? Wrestling, obviously a sport. They meet these criteria. But we're gonna get a little bit hazy, right? So we started discussing a couple really important points, some that we agreed about and some that we didn't. One, we agreed that for a sport, we should add a word to this definition, which means there should be an objective victory, right? Objective victory meaning you score more points than your opponent or you otherwise clearly win the competition, right? So football game, I'm here, my NFC Lions North, it's a lock division championship t-shirt today. You know you win a football game because you outscore your opponent. Simple. Boxing, we'll come back to in a minute, but boxing, you knock out your opponent, you've won the match, right? Clear and obvious, objective win. If your victory is based on judges' subjective criteria, even if it's supposedly objective criteria, but there's discrepancies in how they score you, not a sport. It's a competition, right? So again, at risk of offending, gymnastics, phenomenal athletes, competitors, entertainers, love to watch it. But if you perform your routine and you're flipping and jumping and doing everything else, and you're sticking your landing, and three judges can score you with three different scores because they're looking at it differently, not an objective win, not meeting our definition of a sport, right? So we agreed on that one. We agreed on that. There should be an objective win. So hey, boxing, either you knock out your opponent and you win, or you get a TKO and you win, or you don't. And this whole scoring sheet action, three judges, split ruling, blah blah blah. No, that's subjective BS, right? We know that boxing's had its history of corruption. That should be out of the game. Takes away from it being a sport. If you're winning by points, the judges can see differently. Not objective enough. Not sports criteria. Eliminated. Either it's a win or it's a draw. All right. So that applies to all fighting competitions. That we agreed on. Where we disagreed was my son argued that you have to be able to impede your opponent's chance at victory through your actions for it to be a sport, right? So again, coming back to football, defense stops the offense from scoring, you can impede their victory. Basketball, right? Stop the shot, you're impeding their chance of scoring. It counts. It counts as a sport. His argument was that if it's a race, like a swimming race or a running race, then there's no chance to interfere with your opponent's chance for victory. And it's a contest of strength, a contest of speed, whatever, but not a sport because you can't stop your opponent. You're just doing your very best. Now I disagreed with that point because I feel like a sprint, a pole vault, weightlifting, they should count as sports, right? They meet the other criteria. They're objective victories. They're physically demanding. They require skill, right? You're in competition. So we disagreed there. We agreed that you had to separate two types of sports, to bifurcate the category of sports. And we found a great word, which I was a big fan of, which is the word bork, B-O-R-K. Bork means to obstruct by systematically, by defaming or vilifying them, right? So in that sense, it doesn't really apply. But the word is great, right? To obstruct is to bork. Love that word. So even though it doesn't technically meet the definition we need here, right? Because you're not just obstructing. We didn't feel like obstructing sports was a good word. So we said, hey, we've got borking and non-borking sports, right? A borking sport, you can stop your opponent from succeeding. And a non-borking sport, it's just straight up head-to-head competition. You do the best you can. You may or may not win. Those were our definitions. I'd love to get your feedback on it. I'd love to hear if you agree or disagree. If we're saying something that offends you in your sport, I'm sorry. But we felt like those were good definitions and viable terms, right? So again, we're modifying the term bork to meet our purposes here a little bit. We didn't find a word that was better and more clear in one simple word and one simple syllable here. So to be a sport, again, just to clarify, an activity that involves physical exertion and skill, an individual or team competes against another or others for entertainment, and by our modified definition, has objective criteria for victory. Within that context, two types of sports, borking and non-borking sports. I love them both. I love borking sports, especially, right? But I love non-borking sports too, like weightlifting, like running, like swimming. They're great. So that's how we categorize it. And with that, I came up with a new nickname for one of my favorite players, the unborkable Aiden Hutchinson. This season, that guy's going to come alive in a way we have not seen. He's going to be tough for offensive lines to try and stop. He's going to be completely unborkable, unstoppable, getting sacks, getting picks, swatting balls. That's our thought. So I'm going to start opening segment for today. Love to hear your thoughts and feedback on what constitutes a sport. Are all of our Olympic events sports, or are they contests and competitions, entertainment and games, maybe not sports, right? And I'd also love to hear your thoughts on borking, non-borking. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on my nickname for one of my favorite Detroit Lions, the unborkable Aiden Hutchinson. All right, so hey, that's segment one. Wrapping that up, moving to segment two. A great resource for both entertainment, news, and information, if you haven't checked it out before, is TechDirt. TechDirt is an online blog, news resource. Mike Mancic, Tim Cushing, and a couple others, I think, write some really great articles, right? And sarcastic, consistent in tone and perspective, and they really call out all sides on their hypocritical BS of what they get into, right? So on the 25th, Tim Cushing wrote an article titled, "Journalist Hit with 5,500 Judgment by Italian Court for Mocking Far-Right Politicians' Height." Now he gets into details of it. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm going to read a small excerpt from the article where he's quoting from the AP. just to capture the context of this, right? A judge in Milan has ordered an Italian journalist to pay 5,000 euros, nearly $5,500, in damages to Premier Giorgia Meloni, right? That's their PM, their premier, for making fun of her height in social media posts. The judge ruled on Wednesday that two social media posts by journalist Giulia Cortesi, sorry if I didn't pronounce your name right there, who was also handed a suspended fine of 1,200 euros, amounted to body shaming. Now, listen, I don't advocate for body shaming. It's not a good thing, but you can't be penalized for it, right? That falls under the context of free speech. In Italy, you can be penalized for it, but I'm grateful we don't see that happening here in the United States, right? That kind of stuff is nonsense, right? You can be an ass, you can be offensive, you can be a jerk. We don't have speech police here. We shouldn't have speech police here. Dave and I have talked about this many times, right? I'm a proud supporter of FIRE. It's a great organization, advocates for nonpartisan free speech, not like the bullshit you hear about on Twitter and other social media. So I start with that. I'm going to continue on because I think Tech Dirt goes into a lot of sort of former Twitter mockery because it's so full of crap, right? And so Mike Masnick goes into random Elon engagement stats talking about use and billion user seconds statistics, right? Or 417 billion user seconds, a statistic that doesn't mean anything to anybody. Why I start with that is because Elon's had a rough week, right? He's always in the news. The man loves to be in the news. Notoriety, makes his life worthwhile, and we love to talk about him because he's just an ever-present disaster, and he is a disaster, right? Unmitigated disaster. Just a few things to throw out there on the Elon Musk in the news watch, right? One, brought back up this idea of fighting Mark Zuckerberg. Now, he didn't bring it up on his own. He was asked about it by a journalist, right? But he once again threw out there, hey, I'm up for it anytime. He said, I'll fight Zuckerberg any place, anytime, any rules. Now, for those of you who remember, this got hot last year, I think, maybe early this year, but I think it was last year. And it seemed like they were actually going to go ahead and fight. Elon would have gotten his ass kicked, right? Ended up fizzling out. Didn't happen. It's not going to happen, right? And Zuck's response, he was asked about it on social media. His response was simply, are we really doing this again? Right? That's Mark Zuckerberg in response to a post on Threads. And it's not going to happen, right? It's just Elon seeking attention, desperately seeking attention, as he always was. Well, while he's been desperately seeking attention, he also tends to distort reality, right? Whether it's going back to the Tech Dirt article and making up statistics like user seconds and other nonsense to try and shape stories that meet his needs for attention and success that oftentimes isn't actually there. I want to talk about it on a serious note. His daughter, Vivian, has been the subject of a lot of comments from him, a lot of really hurtful comments for a father to make towards his child. And so she took to social media and several interviews to, as she described it, set the record straight and really talk about an absentee father who lies and manipulates, right, at the cost of his children. And so I'm not going to try and describe the pain that she describes and the nonsense that she describes growing up. Now, his daughter is transgender, which Elon has referred to as woke mind virus. Said his daughter is dead to him. Really hurtful stuff. But she's taken to Threads, other social media, and interviews to sort of try and set the record straight from her end. I would just consider checking those out because I think it's important to understand sort of the character of the individuals that we sometimes hold up on a pedestal, and maybe they're not what they are, right? And nobody's worth being put up on a pedestal, but some folks really aren't, right? And in addition to sort of the disgusting story of how he didn't raise his daughter, Vivian shares an additional story of the ongoing custody battle with music star Grimes, the mother of several of his children, also like painting a really bad picture of what's happening there, right? And so I just offer that not to beat up on Elon Musk, but just sort of to point out that we often give people fame and attention, business, political roles, and maybe they're not the best people to have that. Maybe they don't deserve our time and attention, even when idiots like me talk about them on podcasts like this. But I just throw that out there for consideration. Talk about a couple other quick items in the news. Might break my 3x7 time. That's okay. The last one we won't go quite as long. I want to talk about a couple interesting things in the news, political wise. Dave and I was trying to touch on something, politics wise, just to give you information you might otherwise not have. One, New poll came out. This was, I believe, on Friday, talking about how Kamala Harris, and she has become the prospective and now nominee for the Democratic Party, not officially nominee, but got that wrapped up. That's really cut into RFK's campaign, right? That recent polls have him going down 2, 3 points from where he was as voters move from being RFK Jr. supporters to Kamala Harris supporters. And listen, Dave and I try to be completely transparent in how we talk about things on this podcast. We're not trying to manipulate anybody, hide anything from anybody, not trying to be partisan in any way. You've heard us both struggle with our presidential options, and that was exactly me. And I feel like this poll speaks exactly to my situation, right? I knew that I did not want to support Donald Trump for president. I feel he is a dangerous threat to democracy and cannot be entrusted in the office of the White House. That's my personal feeling. That being said, I didn't know what to do, right? Do I vote for Joe Biden? I wasn't really enthused about that at all. I didn't feel like he was fit for office. He's been great on some issues as president. There's others that I really disagree with. So wasn't enthused about that idea. Didn't want to vote for RFK Jr., but was stuck feeling like I might consider it because I felt like I had to vote for somebody. And look, Chase Oliver, as I said before, I like Chase Oliver. I agree with a lot of his ideas politically, but Chase Oliver is a snowball, and this 2024 presidential election is hell, right? And it's just not going to work out for him. So I can't support him because I can't support his absolute shit show of a party, and he has no chance or place, running for president right now. So, like you, Chase, can't support you. Left me with a really pickle of a situation. With Joe Biden stepping down, with Kamala Harris stepping in, while I know I will disagree with a potential President Harris, I will definitely disagree on a number of issues, most specifically reckless spending and centralization of power in Washington, D.C., right? I will object to those things, and I'll talk about that. But I do not feel she's a threat to democracy, and if she's a bad president, she can be voted out in 4 years, and she'll concede the election if she loses. Unlike Donald Trump, who, as Bill Maher likes to often point out, doesn't concede elections. That's a problem for democracy, right? So July 29th, I can tell you, I intend to vote for Kamala Harris. I think she's the best option we have for president. Not a Democrat, not enthused about the idea, but definitely all in for the idea because I believe the other options simply don't work. That's where I'm coming from. You can disagree with that. That's fine. Just want to be transparent. But with that, I want to call out a little bit of bullshit, and then I'll get into one last, more significant commentary. Kamala Harris exceeds 1 million TikTok followers within hours of joining. Hey, great. No issue with that. Don't care. What I care about is the Biden administration, the Trump administration, Congress calling that, TikTok is a national security threat and it must be sold probably to some rich old white guy, right? And then they get on and they use the platform, which is hypocritical bullshit. If it's a national security threat, don't use it. If it's not a national security threat, stop threatening it to force its sale, which is still what's happening now. Like we're in the process of that now and TikTok fighting back. Now, I don't like TikTok. I do think there are security concerns about TikTok, but that's an individual user decision to make. We don't need the federal government banning social media options from the Americans, from the American people, because they can see it as a threat or not. And if it's such a threat, then why the hell are you on it? Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. You're all full of shit on that note. Get consistent, make up your minds, quit being hypocrites. It's embarrassing. Shame on you. Something else I found this weekend as I talked about my support for Kamala Harris is I found myself in the awkward position of supporting something J.D. Vance, or at least J.D. Vance relevant, right? No, it's not about couches or dolphins or having sex with dolphins or anything along those lines, but it's a good article in the Wall Street Journal that talks about J.D. Vance and his deployment as a Marine to Iraq and how that really opened him up as a skeptic of war and I think of the GOP of the time, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. I'll share the link. You can read the article. It basically talks about a young J.D. Vance deploying, believing in the war, and then coming to find, hey, maybe this isn't what we were sold, and maybe this administration isn't telling us everything they were supposed to tell us. And he's right about that, right? And I think a lot of the reason you find today individuals like J.D. Vance and others support Donald Trump and sort of the MAGA movement so vehemently is they feel like their government is not honest. They were lied to. We were fighting wars and losing soldiers, right, in mischievous, deceitful operations, right? They didn't trust the administration of George W. Bush and everything that came after, and they questioned a lot of what came before. And listen, he's right to do so. George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, and as much as I hate to say it, Colin Powell, like lied to the world. They lied to American people and they lied to the world about the motivations and the facts of what they knew and didn't know going into the war in Iraq. And we lost a lot of great American men and women and countless others, Iraqis and other international military personnel, in an unnecessary war, in an unprovoked war, right? And that's why a lot of people got disillusioned with politics, got disillusioned with the old GOP, and are now MAGA Republicans, right? And on that note, I agree with JD Vance. Like that was a national tragedy. I don't agree with where he ended up, but I understand the idea of how he got there. And that's one of the pieces that got him there. Now, George W. Bush, right, let's not forget, is on par with Donald Trump as an absolutely horrendous president. To Donald Trump credit, didn't get us into any new wars, right? That's a credit to him. Didn't get us out of Afghanistan, but didn't get us into new wars, right? Joe Biden gets credit for moving us out of Afghanistan, even if it wasn't done brilliantly. He got us out of there, and that was long overdue. Trump didn't get us into any wars. George Bush, a long, drawn-out response in Afghanistan, could have been quicker, could have been better, could have been more focused. Got distracted fighting an unnecessary war in Iraq. I served in both of those combat zones. Neither was a wonderful experience. I can tell you in all honesty, Iraq was the worst year of my life. I can give you more story of how I got to Iraq there because like JD Vance, I believed in what the administration was selling us. I put myself in a position to deploy. And while I don't regret that decision in and of itself, I regret the war that I was involved with. And it was a shame on America and shame on George W. Bush. He's a piece of garbage. He owes the American people, veterans and our families an apology, which we're never going to get. And it's disgusting to see him being celebrated. I can't stand it. Can't stand the guy. So on this note, JD Vance, you're right. You're right. I'll give you credit for that, my man. Let's close out with a couple quick things here. Last portion. I'll come back to this topic another day. I'm going to skip one topic. Just listen, as we give grief to our political opponents, those we disagree with, whether it's JD Vance or Kamala Harris, whoever you might disagree with, just because somebody disagrees with you politically, right, doesn't really make them a bad guy. There's a reason why they believe what they believe, and we should have open hearts, right, empathy to try to understand where they're coming from. And just because somebody supports a certain candidate doesn't make them, like, in of themselves objectionable. And I see that on social media with people that I like. I see that in the news. And there's an article from the LA Times, I'm not going to get into it, but there's real grifters and assholes out there that take advantage of people, that hurt people, that cause harm to others. Those are bad people, right? And Donald Trump might be a bad person, or you might think Kamala Harris herself is a bad person, or whatever, right? I'm not saying yes or no to either one of those. But just because somebody supports a candidate or has a political opinion, like, they're not bad people. Like, break bread with them, drink a beer with them. They're just Americans like you and me. They have a different opinion, and there's a reason why they have that opinion. There's a reason why they support their candidate or the other. Don't put people on your bad list just because you disagree with them politically. Like that's terrible. All right, but hey, we talked about Deadpool and Wolverine. Fantastic opening weekend, $205 million opening weekend, biggest R-rated opening in history, eighth biggest in box office history, a much needed event for America, right? I mean, we needed a really good summer blockbuster. Dave and I have talked about this a number of times, right? And this is it. They did it here. Great to see. But even as that was happening, it may be even bigger news, right? Exciting news. Robert Downey Jr. is returning to Marvel along with the Russo brothers as he's going to play not Tony Stark, well, maybe Tony Stark, but not Iron Man, as he's going to be Doctor Doom in the Avengers Doomsday movie and the Avengers Secret Wars movie, right? So Avengers episodes 5 and 6, taking a massive turn after they had to end the Kang storyline. We won't get into that. Jonathan Majors, I'm sorry, man, you blew it. Bringing back the iconic, much-loved Robert Downey Jr. to play one of the greatest villains of all time in Doctor Doom. Cannot wait to see where this goes and how this unfolds. I think it's going to be great. The Russo brothers have done fantastic in Marvel. They've done really exciting movies. Robert Downey Jr. just did an amazing job as Iron Man, saved his career and really blew up the Marvel universe in an exciting way. Can't wait to see how they do this. My guess is that it's going to be Tony Stark in a multiverse play, and he ends up being Doctor Doom as opposed to Victor Von Doom. We'll see how that goes, how that shakes out. There's time to see that, but huge, huge news on both the directors, Joe and Anthony Russo, and Robert Downey Jr. coming back to the MCU. It was revealed in great celebration this weekend at Comic-Con 2024. It was awesome to see. You can see the videos of him coming out and the reveal, the greatest actor playing the greatest villain. A lot of fun, a lot of fun. So big box office weekend. Dave saw it. We'll talk about it. I'm going to go see it this weekend. Big news coming out with Doctor Doom and the new Avengers movies. We don't even know who the Avengers are going to be exactly. So a fun note to wrap things up with. Hey, that's today's podcast. Love to hear your thoughts on sports, Olympics, agree, disagree. Happy to hear your thoughts on politics and news, if you agree or disagree. Happy to hear if you saw Deadpool and Wolverine. Don't give me any spoilers, man, but was it good? Were you excited about it? Would love to hear your thoughts there. And how excited are you about Doctor Doom and Robert Downey Jr.? I'm a 10 out of 10. I think it's going to be awesome. So, hey, that's today's pod. We'll hold it there. We'll wrap it up. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining. Thanks for sharing the conversation with us on Threads. I always love talking with folks about your thoughts, your likes, your not likes, on what Dave and I are talking about. We're just here to keep it fun, have a good time, be honest, let you know where we're coming from, and how to provide a rational Gen X voice and all the nonsense and things around us. So Dave will be back on Wednesday. Looking forward to that. Until then, we'll catch you next time.